All right, now for the climax. Well, actually, the climax has kind of already happened, at least in terms of Haman. The Haman issue has been dealt with, but the problem that he started, the edict that he decreed, ordering the assassination of the Jews throughout the kingdom of Persia, that hasn't been dealt with. We still got to figure out how to solve that problem. Oh, she moved right at the wrong moment, right at before I could get that camera. She was really cute there. She's a big, fat, ugly cat, but that was cute. But right at the moment that I tried to move the camera, or did move the camera, she moved. Oh well. That same day, this is all happening the same day. This is a very quick series of events here, last couple chapters. King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. This was common policy to turn a traitor's estate over to the king. So now he has it and he gives it to the queen. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her, so now the secret is out. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. So now Mordecai is the number 2 guy. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther herself can't really do anything with Haman's estate, which is referring to not only his house and property, but all of his wealth. Because she's in the king's harem, like she can't leave the king's harem. So the estate doesn't really mean anything to her, so she gives it to Mordecai to manage it. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it right to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows, or impaled him on the pole, impaled him on the wood, actually. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So he cannot revoke the earlier issued decree. But you can write another one that counteracts it. At once the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. This is 70 days since this whole thing started, so there's another reference to that 70. It's just 70 times, this is 7 times 10. This is a perfect number, another clue that God's involvement behind the scenes and all that's going on here. They wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers, who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Now, they're not actually going to end up plundering anybody. We're going to read about that here in a bit, but they're not actually going to take this plunder, but they were legally allowed to under this edict. The day appointed for the... So they can act in self-defense. They are not going to be able to randomly kill whoever they want to kill, but if someone attacks them, they can fight to the death in return. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So they got the message initially, and then a couple of months later they got another message overriding, well, not overriding it, but saying that, hey, if anybody does attack the Jews can fight to the death to kill that person to defend themselves. The couriers, riding the royal horses, raced out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. So he is now the number 2 guy. The honors that Haman had now go to Mordecai. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province, in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews, because fear of the Jews had seized them. Now that's a very interesting concept there. What does it mean for them to become Jews? Well, you have to, first of all, try to determine what it means to even be a Jew at this point in time anyway. A Jew initially was a Judahite, okay? Initially, that meant someone from the tribe of Judah. By that definition, even Mordecai isn't a Jew because he's the tribe of Benjamin, as is Esther. So they wouldn't be Jews by the old definition. Later on, once the kingdom of Israel split into 2, and Judah and Benjamin formed the southern kingdom, it was called Judah. And so a person who identified with that kingdom became a Judahite. And that wasn't just the tribe of Judah, because Benjamin was with them, some of the Levites were with them. The tribe of Simeon was incorporated entirely in Judah's territory. And we read in the book of Kings about how some of the northerners came down to Judah, because that's where the temple of God was, and that's where the proper worship system of God was. So the Judahites at that time were more than just the tribe of Judah. It was anybody who identifies nationally with the kingdom of Judah. But that kingdom ceased to exist upon Nebuchadnezzar's invasion. And it doesn't really even exist now, at this point in time. So in the exile, a Judahite became someone who practiced the religion of the Judahites, which became Judaism. Since the temple was gone and the priesthood wasn't functioning and they couldn't offer sacrifices, they couldn't cleanse themselves, they had to institute a new religious system to essentially replace that, which is what became the synagogues and all that sort of stuff, which is what we read about in the New Testament. And people who practiced that now became Jews. So Jew has gone from being a reference to someone from the tribe of Judah to a citizen of the kingdom of Judah to now someone who practices the religion of Judaism, which itself is kind of a truncated version of Judahitism. It's pretty complicated. Okay. So somehow or another, these people became Jews. I don't think the men were circumcised. I doubt it. Previously, if you wanted to become a Jew, you actually had to become like a national member of the Jew. You know, it's like you had to marry into the family, the Judah families. You had to circumcise if you were male. It's like to become a Jew, you had to actually graft yourself into their family lines. I don't think that's happening here. But I think what this refers to is people who are adopting the Jewish customs and the practices of Judaism, or at least are identifying as Jews. It's interesting. It's interesting to think about that. On the 13th, here's the big day, chapter 9 of Esther. Here's the big day, the day of fighting. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. So there were some people who did attack. Some people did hate the Jews enough that they went ahead with the attack. The Jews assembled in their cities and all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those seeking their destruction. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. Of course, that fear would have come from God. So another reference to God's work behind the scenes here to influence the outcome. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the kings and ministers helped the Jews. So the government officials were on the side of the Jews. So if you're going to fight the Jews, you're going to be fighting the government officials too, because the fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing it, not the fear of Esther, by the way. of the fear of Mordecai. This is still very much a man's world. Esther may have been the key agent and responsible for changing the king's mind, but this is still very much a man's world. Mordecai is the guy who's going to get the credit for it. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Vazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those slain, we're going to talk about that in a moment, by the way. The number of those slain in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will be granted." "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on gallows." So basically hung up on poles. They're already dead, so let their bodies be hung up on poles, impaled on poles. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they hanged the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa. This is not the citadel of Susa. This is the rest of the city. They've already fought those people in the citadel of Susa. Now this is the rest of the city. So they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them. Now, it would have taken some time for these numbers to be compiled and reported back to the king, so obviously this is being written at some later date. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. So they have finally corrected the mistake that King Saul made way back in the days of 1 Samuel 15. In the days of King Saul, he was told by God to go finish off the Amalekites, and he wiped out a lot of them, but he spared the king. Of course, Samuel killed him later. And the stuff, some of the best stuff. He took some of the plunder. Now, he said to Samuel that he was going to offer it as sacrifice to God, but I don't know if he meant that or not. I think it might have been just an excuse. I really don't know. But even if so, even if his intentions were sincere in that regard, even if he meant what he said, he still wasn't told to do that. He was told to offer it all up. He was not to lay his hand on any of the plunder. And because of that boo-boo, the kingship was taken from him. So now finally, 600 years later, this mistake is being corrected. They have fought the Amalekites, those who have the spirit of Amalek in them, not necessarily his literal descendants, but the spirit of the Amalekites, who were the first to attack the Jews, the Israelites, the Hebrews, back before they were Jews even, actually. And they finished them off, and they did not take the plunder. This time, and they were even legally allowed to. The legal ruling from the Persian king allowed them to do that, but they didn't. So after all this time, that Saul's mistake in 1 Samuel 15 has finally been corrected. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day of giving presents to each other. So in the city Jews observe on the 15th. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as a month when their sorrow was turned to joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Now, I don't know if when it says he recorded these events, I don't think it's referring to the book of Esther as we have it now. Although it's very, very possible that his record of these events formed the basis of the book of Esther at some point in time after that. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. That means on a yearly basis. Obviously, by the time Mordecai's letters would have reached them, it would have been long after the day of celebration itself. So they're going to make it a yearly thing. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, or when Esther came before the king, he issued written orders of the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows, his own gallows, as it turned out. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur, that's the plural of pur. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish. I don't know if God gave them permission to do this. I don't know that, again, we don't reference the name of God in this book. Did they get divine clearance from God to do this, or did they? I don't know. It said took it upon themselves. I don't know. The Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants, and all who join them, should without fail observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, and every province, and every city. And these days of Purim should never cease to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. That's her only reference to Esther herself writing this letter. I'm assuming she probably did not actually write it. My guess is that Esther probably could not read or write, but I don't know. She may have been able to. It had her authority at least, whatever authority. The queen didn't have that much authority, okay? We have seen consistently in this book, Esther has to really beseech and appeal to the king to get anything done. But the queen did not have all that much authority. Wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at the designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. Unfortunately, we don't have those records today, except for this one. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire. He is a king, after all. That would refer to both taxes and labor, to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king had raised him. Are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? We saw that a lot back when we were reading Kings and Chronicles, didn't we? That's how every account of the king's life ended. Of the account, is the account not written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah? Well, presumably it is. We just don't have those books anymore. We don't have these books anymore either. We don't have the records of the Persians and the Medians. Unfortunately, we don't. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people, and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. So that is where the celebration of Purim comes from. I have no idea if that was God sanctioned or not. There's no hint in the text of Esther that it was officially God approved or not. And that goes on to a bigger thing, because during their time in exile and when they came back to the land, they established a lot of customs and protocols and habits and traditions that were not God sanctioned. They were not God ordained. Chief among them being the synagogue. You're not going to hear a word of the synagogue mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament, because it was not given to them by God. And yet in the New Testament, they all follow the synagogue, and no one says anything about Jesus went to the synagogue. He just read in the synagogue. Paul went to the synagogue. When the apostles left Jerusalem and went to the other cities around the Roman Empire, the first thing they always did was go to the local synagogue and preach to the Jews there first. But nowhere do we ever hear any hint that God ever told them to organize a synagogue. Same thing here in Esther. I don't know if God had any thoughts of this matter or not. Esther deliberately, the book of Esther deliberately doesn't mention him. So I don't know if this is ever if God sanctioned or God approved. So, alright, that's the book of Esther. I said we'd get through it in one day, and we did. It took a couple of hours, and we got through it. Next time, we're going to go back and we're going to read the rest of the book of Ezra. We're actually going to finally see Ezra himself in the book of Ezra. Ezra only appears in this later near the end of the book of Ezra. So we'll read Ezra 7 through 10. After that, all we're going to have left is Nehemiah and Malachi. And I'm not yet sure how I'm going to handle that, because Malachi probably lived and ministered sometime in the time frame of Nehemiah. So I'm not sure if I'm going to read Malachi before Nehemiah or after Nehemiah, or maybe split up Nehemiah or read Malachi in the middle of it. I haven't determined that yet. But I'm going to read the rest of Ezra next. And we'll do that next time.